The decision to focus strictly on helping young girls, I'm sure, aside from the passion you have for it, it might have also been affected by maybe some of the issues that you were seeing young girls facing.
I think girls are even more anxious now. There's more depression. There's more stress. There's more pressure on them. I encourage parents to get a kind of report card all around their life. So when you go to a parent-teacher conference, I'd be much less interested in how are her grades. I'd be more interested in what's she like in your class. Does she talk to people? Does she raise her hand? How does she seem? Have you noticed her in the cafeteria? Who is she hanging with? Who is she sitting with?
So you're a behavioral pediatrician. You're also an author, a speaker, a podcast host, and you run retreats. All of your work is focused around young girls, which is, I think, unique. I've never come across anyone that really has your specialty. And to be honest with you, I never looked until I had my daughter, and I started to look for perhaps what might be the optimal way to raise her. Can you give me some background in your own words on what you have going on with all the various things you're involved in?
Well, my background, I'm a pediatrician. That was my original training. But then I did a 2-year fellowship in something called developmental and behavioral pediatrics. That's kind of a mouthful. But I was a pediatrician for about 3 years, and I decided it wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to do my subspecialty more. So about 30-something years ago, I stopped being like a everyday pediatrician, and I started my counseling practice. So it's evolved a lot. So today, what it looks like is a few days a week, I counsel girls in my office, mostly middle school, high school, and college girls or young women, an hour each, a few days a week. My wife and I have a school program called Strong Girls, Strong World. So we're like this semester, we were in 2 schools. We go maybe every week or so. I also do these. I have my own podcast called Raising Daughters. So I spend a lot of time doing that. We also travel about 8, 10, 12 times a year, giving workshops, talks. We've run a lot of father-daughter, father-son retreats all over the place. What else do I do? So that's the main thing. And also the weekend retreats and the summer camps for girls. And those are now 33 years old, which is probably older than you are. And so the retreats are personal growth in nature. We decided that's another little niche that we have is it's fun camp. It's fun retreats. We have a blast. But there's also a learning part of it, a social, emotional learning aspect, which is really unique.
Thanks for sharing that. So I did read that you were in pediatrics full-time for over 40 years before you started to pursue what you're currently doing.
Only for 3 years was I a pediatrician. So I've been doing the counseling and all this other stuff over the last 33 or so years.
Got it. You're on your 6th book as well at the moment, in addition to the hundreds of podcast episodes. So before we jump into how you're able to juggle all the things you're currently doing and all the things you're currently doing, can you give me some background on sort of what the spark was for you to go into pediatrics in the first place?
Well, I've known my whole life that I wanted to work with kids because my whole life I've worked with kids. When I was a kid, I umpired Core League baseball. I worked in summer camps for, I think, 4 or 5 summers. I always loved being with kids, playing with kids, working with kids. And my wife says, I had 2 older brothers growing up, and then I came along, number 3 boy. My parents thought, oh my gosh, we'll never have any girls. Then they had 5 girls. So I had 5 younger sisters growing up. So my wife says that's where my love for working with girls started. And I was like a second dad for my youngest 2 sisters. There was a 10-year gap. And my dad was gone a lot working, trying to afford or to pay for 8 kids. So I've been like a dad for 1,000 years. So I think that my love for kids has always been there. And when I went to college, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to work with kids somehow. I took education classes. I took the pre-med classes in case I wanted to be a pediatrician. And then for lots of different reasons, I end up in the medical track. Our camps initially 33 years ago were co-ed. And my counseling practice way back in the day was co-ed. But after a certain number of years of that, I just realized I had more of a love for working with girls. They were easier. And our camps became more, if I can say that, this girl-friendly. the sitting down in a circle and talking about your life, talking about your challenges, talking about your feelings. We just became a more girl-friendly in that sense, if you will. Boys need their own personal growth as well, but I think what we did was more geared towards girls. And so I stopped seeing girls in my counseling practice. We stopped having girls in our camps, probably, I'd say 15 to 20 years ago. And just developed this niche.
The decision to focus strictly on helping young girls, I'm sure, aside from the passion you have for it, it might have also been affected by maybe some of the issues that you were seeing young girls facing. Is that accurate to say? And if so, what kind of issues at that time were you seeing young girls really being challenged with versus today?
Yeah, I think we saw a need that wasn't being met, meaning that girls who were struggling with a lot of stress. I think what's evolved in the last 15 or 20 years since we switched over was I think girls are even more anxious now. There's more depression. There's more stress. There's more pressure on them. There's a organization called, I think, the American Association of College Mental Health, something or other. Anyway, for the last 20 or more years, every year they do surveys of like 90,000 college students all over the country, asking all kinds of questions. But there's a big section on mental health. And if you look at the answers that men versus women have in college, and they ask questions like, how many in the last year have you experienced blank? Things like overwhelming stress, high anxiety, feeling a lot of pressure, not being able to sleep, having at least moderate depression. When they ask those questions, the girls, 2/3 at least, will answer yes to those questions. Boys, it's more like 30% or so. So it's less. There's some of that in boys, but not nearly as much for girls. So girls are feeling that stress and that pressure even more so today than boys. It's different. Boys have their own stresses and all, but I think girls are suffering more. And there's a ton of research that would show you that for a lot of reasons that girls' levels of anxiety and depression are higher than boys.
My daughter is 3 years old, so perhaps too young to really feel that stress or anxiety yet. But if there were a parent who was worried about their daughter and they feel like she has some of that stress and anxiety, and they came to you, they said, "Hey, Dr. Jordan, can you help me or can you help my daughter?" What would that look like in terms of someone wanting to work with you or attend your workshops or camps?
Well, they could go to our website. It's just drtimjordan.com. Or they could call our office, and set an appointment. But I would first listen. I would try and get a sense of, wonder what's going on with my daughter. Why does she seem so stressed? Some girls are like open books. They'll share it all. There's other kids who hold things closer to the vest. That's true for boys and girls. So you kind of have to know your kid and to kind of have a sense of what's the best context to get the most for her to share more. And so I think I would listen. I would ask a few questions like, what's going on? I've noticed lately that you've been having a hard time sleeping. I've noticed lately you've had a hard time feeling more stress. You're not turning your homework in. You don't seem to be calling your friends as much, things of that sort. And I would listen to try and get a sense of what's going on for my kid. I also I encourage parents to get a kind of a report card all around their life. So when you go to a parent-teacher conference, I'd be much less interested in how are her grades. I'd be more interested in what's she like in your class. Does she talk to people? Does she raise her hand? How does she seem? Have you noticed her in the cafeteria? Who is she hanging with? Who is she sitting with? So I try and get a sense of all of that. One of the things I have found when girls come to my office, and a lot of them have been diagnosed already. They've seen maybe a psychiatrist or someone with anxiety disorder or depression or something. In my experience, most of them don't really deserve a diagnosis the way I look at it. What I find is a lot of them, what they're showing you are symptoms of overload. I ask girls a series of questions. I'll ask them, do you ever feel like you get overwhelmed, overloaded? Oh, yeah. And I'll say, how can you tell? And they're like, I'm not sure. And I say, let me go down this list of questions in my mind. Do you ever have a hard time falling asleep at night? You ask a room full of girls, almost every hand goes up. Do you ever snap at people who don't deserve it? And most of them raise their hands. Usually their parents, sometimes their boyfriends or girlfriends or their friends. Do you ever get body symptoms, stomach aches, headaches? A lot of hands go up for that one. Do you ever have anxiety, get really worried about things, get all worked up? Lots of hands. Do you ever have a hard time focusing in school? Do you get distracted? Do you ever feel kind of blah, like you lose your motivation? Those are symptoms of there's a lot going on. I'm not taking care of it. I have been conditioned by our culture to be busy and to be distracted. And we've done a great job of modeling and teaching our kids to be distracted and busy. And so they don't know how to take some alone quiet time to check in and say, what's going on? I don't feel right. Why am I so stressed? What's going on? They have a hard time doing that. And so they just get distracted from it. I don't want to feel it. I don't want to go there. And so those feelings and those thoughts and those issues build up to the point where now they're on overload, and then it starts looking like anxiety or depression or any of those kinds of symptoms. I see more of that than I see kids who really, in my mind, deserve a diagnosis.